this is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.
Nationwide is so much more than a great insurance company. They're one of America's largest financial services companies. Like how I'm more than just Peyton Manning. I'm also motivating Manning. When I say insurance, you say financial services. Insurance.
Financial services.
Insurance.
Financial services.
Now when I say nationwide, you say is both. Nationwide.
Is both.
Nationwide.
Is both.
For your insurance and financial needs, Nationwide is on your side.
Nationwide Investment Services Corporation, member FINRA, Columbus, Ohio.
This is Julian Edelman from Games with Names. As a fellow dude, do you ever get that not so fresh feeling in your butt? That's because you're probably using the dry stuff to wipe. Wet, extra large, flushable dude wipes get what toilet paper leaves behind in your behind. You wouldn't clean the tail end of your truck with dry paper towels. So why would you wipe with dry toilet paper? Wetter just cleans better. There are no more dingleberries, no more itch and irritation, just a deep, down the seam, confident clean. So don't fumble the ball with toilet paper. Stop being an a-hole to your b-hole. Drop the toilet paper. Available on Amazon and major retailers nationwide. Dude wipes, best clean, pants down.
This is the Late Round Podcast with your host, JJ Zacharisa.
What's up, everyone? It's JJ Zacharisa, and in this episode 1067 of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, thanks for tuning in. Before I get to the trends this week, I just want to send another reminder to subscribe to the Late Round newsletter. It's free, and you get my content straight to your inbox. Just head to lateround.com, click newsletter, and sign up. It just takes a couple of seconds. Now let's get to these trends. The Steelers were pass heavier than usual against the Ravens on Sunday. I don't know if this is a sign of things to come, but it was kind of encouraging from a fantasy perspective. According to Fantasy Life's pass rate over expected data, Pittsburgh saw a plus 9% pass rate over expected against Baltimore. That was the highest of their season. And it was just the second time they've been over plus 3% this season. The Steelers finally really focused their offense around DK Metcalf. He saw a 38% target share, and his 14.8 average up the target was his highest since week 10. It was his second highest since week 7. I know Arthur Smith is an avid listener of the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, so Artie, more of that, please. Dan Campbell started calling plays for the Lions in week 10 against Washington. Up until that point in time in their 5 previous games, Jahmyr Gibbs had peaked at a 10.7% target share. And during that stretch of 5 games, he hit a 10% target share just once. His target share per game rate was 8.6%. From week 1 through week 9, Gibbs had a target share per game rate of 13%. But since Campbell took over play calling duties, Gibbs has had a target share per game rate of 21%. Now, this could be Sam Laporta related. Laporta went down with a season-ending injury in week 10. That's exactly when this trend started. Regardless, Gibbs is seeing more work through the air. That's why he's been so dominant in fantasy football. It'll be interesting to see how it all translates to the fantasy playoffs, though. Detroit, they get the Rams, Steelers, and Vikings. Not only are those teams bottom 12 matchups for running backs by adjusted fantasy points allowed, they're also bottom 12 teams in adjusted target share allowed to running backs. Not that you're benching Jahmyr Gibbs, of course. Trevor Lawrence has been better in fantasy football than you realize. It was a brutal start to his season. But there may be some anchoring bias going on after he averages 12.3 standard fantasy points per game across his first 4 games. Since week 5, Lawrence is averaging 18.6 points per game. He's essentially been a low-end QB1, high-end QB2 for most of the year. And with Jacoby Myers over the last 4 weeks, Lawrence hasn't had fewer than 15 points in a game. Now, I don't know if he's going to be super usable against the Jets, Broncos, and Colts. That's his schedule in the fantasy playoffs. But I do think he's been a better option than people realize. The Cowboys traded for Quinnen Williams mid-season. He's been playing with them since week 11, so it's been 4 weeks now. Across the Cowboys' first 9 games, they allowed a little over 110 running back rushing yards per game. Backs were averaging 4.9 yards per carry against them. Over their last 4 games, all with Williams, Dallas has given up 55 running back rushing yards per game. so half of what they were allowing pre-trade. Their yards per carry allowed has gone from 4.9 to 4.1. Now, matchup is obviously going to play a role here, but the Cowboys, over their last 4 games, they've faced Ashton Genty, Saquon Barkley, the Chiefs running backs, and then Jahmyr Gibbs and David Montgomery. The first 2 backs, they underperformed on the ground, and Gibbs did too by his standards. Dallas is becoming a beautiful pass funnel for fantasy purposes. Speaking of the Cowboys, let's look at their offense for a second. Dallas's offense leads the league in yards per game, and the offense has by far the most passing yards per game. Dak Prescott on the year from a fantasy perspective, he's the QB4, averaging 19.9 standard fantasy points per game. But here's what's really impressive about that. When looking at adjusted fantasy points allowed, Dallas's median opponent so far this season has been the 5th toughest in all of football. Which means that you could argue that from a fantasy football perspective, the Cowboys have had a bottom 5 schedule for quarterbacks in the league. And when you dig into it, you can see that. Dak has faced just 4 top half opponents this year by adjusted fantasy points allowed. The Giants, Bears, Lions, and Commanders. Everyone else has ranked 18th or worse in terms of being a favorable opponent. And really, Dak hasn't performed significantly better or worse in those matchups. Now, in the fantasy playoffs, Dallas gets the Vikings, Chargers, and Commanders. Those first 2 matchups are not a cakewalk, and that's why Dallas has one of the toughest playoff schedules for quarterbacks. But given this passing attack's performance in fantasy, I wouldn't be overly worried. And that Commanders game in Week 17, it could be a great one. Without Rome Odunze on Sunday, the Bears ran 12 personnel on 34% of their offensive snaps according to Fantasy Life data. Across the rest of the season, that number has been 29%. So there was a little bit more 12 personnel. That's not that surprising when you have Colston Loveland and Cole Kmet. The crazy thing, though, is that Kmet actually ran one more route than Colston Loveland. Loveland was at just a 59% route share, and he hasn't been above a 70% route participation rate since Week 9. That's when Cole Kmet was hurt. Now look, Loveland looks like the real deal. His secondary numbers, they're great for a rookie tight end. But until we see these route shares change, he's going to have to be super special on the efficiency front to be a higher-end fantasy asset in the fantasy playoffs. We saw Marion Hampton on a football field again. That was great. He was active against the Eagles on Monday night. I thought he looked pretty good considering the injury. The problem was that he didn't have a great snap share compared to Kamani Vidal. Hampton had a 31% snap share on Monday night. Vidal was at 69%. But when Hampton was on the field, he was touching the ball. Despite the snap discrepancy, Hampton had just 1 fewer rush and 1 fewer target than Vidal against the Eagles. And Hampton found the end zone. My guess as to why we saw the snap share difference, it's 2 things. 1, they probably want to ease Hampton back into that lineup. But number 2, he had a blown pass pro rep that forced him off the field. I still think Hampton's going to see a lot of work for the Chargers down the stretch. But we could see a scenario where Vidal's getting more work because of his pass pro, similar to what we have in New England. And that'll at least hurt Hampton's ceiling to some degree. Now, this is pretty obvious, but I think we all should be pretty nervous about this Colts offense without Daniel Jones. And when this kind of thing happens, a lot of people just automatically go to the pass catchers, which fair. But the offense itself is going to be worse. It's also going to impact Jonathan Taylor a ton. And look, we haven't seen Taylor play as well recently, at least from a fantasy perspective. He's averaged just 11.7 PPR points per game over his last 3. That number was 27.4 across his first 10. And one thing I didn't like seeing in week 14 was that he didn't see a single target. Things were really cooking for him on the usage front in this offense. Any sort of change brings a lot more volatility to his profile. And then look, the upcoming schedule, it's not amazing. The Colts get the Seahawks, the 49ers, and then the Jags in the fantasy playoffs. We just saw Taylor post 11 PPR points against Jacksonville, and we know that Seattle is good defensively. It's pretty amazing how things can change so fast in this game, both for the Colts, but for us fantasy managers too. I'm still relatively bullish about Lamar Jackson turning things around in the fantasy playoffs, at least compared to how the average fantasy manager probably views it. Jackson came back from his injury in week 9. From week 9 to week 12, he had just one game with more than one design rush attempt. Over his last 2 games, he's had 2 design rush attempts in both games. And then what I think is helpful here is that over his last 3 games, he's seen 5, 3, and 5 scrambles. In his 3 games prior to that, coming off the injury, he was at 2, 3, and 1. Jackson gave us that stinker on Thanksgiving, but he was also just a couple of weird plays away from having a usable performance. And then he posted 21 standard fantasy points on Sunday. He had 43 rushing yards. That was the most that he's had since he was injured in week 4. With games against the Bengals and Patriots over their next 2, I think he can be okay. The rushing is at least trending in the right direction. I'm going to end today's show with some data on Michael Wilson, because this Michael Wilson stuff is absolutely wild. In games with Marvin Harrison Jr. this year, Wilson's averaged 5.8 PPR points per game. He doesn't have a single game with more than 9.1 PPR points. In games without Harrison Jr., he's averaged 30.8. He scored 33.5, 21.8, and 37.2 PPR points. Now, I've seen the narrative out there that the Cardinals are just passing more without Marvin Harrison Jr. That's what's really helping Michael Wilson. But this is also why we look at target share. Michael Wilson has had target shares of 32%, 33%, and 36% in his 3 games without Harrison Jr. In Marvin Harrison Jr.'s short career, he's gotten to a 30% target share just 3 times. Now, another narrative that's out there is that Marvin Harrison Jr., he could be doing this with 15 targets too. And while I'm someone who absolutely believes that targets are earned, I do think this switch to Jacoby Brissett is making a real impact. Consider this. Kyler Murray played the first 5 weeks of the season as their starter. In those 5 games, according to Fantasy Points data, the top wide receiver, so this would exclude Trey McBride, but the top wide receiver never saw higher than a 23% first read target share in any of those 5 games. Trey McBride was consistently over that mark. Then Jacoby Brissett takes over in week 6. Since then, the team's top wide receiver, he's been at or above that 23% mark in all but 1 game. Even Marvin Harrison Jr., when he was active earlier this year with Brissett, he had first read target share games of 27%, 56%, and 38%. Michael Wilson has been at 40%, 37%, and 53% in his 3 games without Marv. Now, you could say that targets are more consolidated when Marvin Harrison Jr. is out. But like I said, Marvin Harrison Jr.'s first read target shares, they've also been higher with Brissett too. Significantly higher. So I think a combination of things is happening here. 1, the Cardinals are weak at wide receiver, so it's a little bit easier for Michael Wilson to see looks when Marvin Harrison Jr. is out. And it's in an offense that has the highest pass rate over expected in all of football. But Jacoby Brissett is likely just not getting through his reads the same way that Kyler Murray was. Or Brissett just might be more of an aggressive passer. That checks out when you see that 16.5% of his throws are tight window throws. That's according to Next Gen Stats. Kyler Murray this year was at 13.7%. What I do think we can probably conclude is that if Marvin Harrison Jr. were playing as his top target, as Jacoby Brissett's top target, I would imagine that Harrison Jr. would be getting more looks than he did with Kyler Murray. Now that we have more data on it. But without Marvin Harrison Jr., so many more looks are going to Michael Wilson. Because this is a tendency of Jacoby Brissett's. And Michael Wilson is capitalizing and showing people that he's just been probably unfairly buried the last couple of seasons. That's it for today's show, though. Thanks to all of you for listening. If you yet subscribe to the Late Round Fantasy Football Podcast, make sure you are by searching for it pretty much anywhere podcasts can be found. And to follow me on Twitter and on Blue Sky at Late Round QB. Thanks for listening, everyone. I'll be back in your ears tomorrow with the Weekly Sleeper Show.
You know what a girl's best friend is? Not diamonds, her lawyers.
From executive producer Ryan Murphy comes a fiery new legal drama.
It's our own boutique. Women representing women.
You can't afford to miss.
Make it rain.
Showtime, ladies.
Stand up straight. And breeze into that room like a storm no one saw coming.
Hulu original series, All's Fair. Now streaming on Hulu and Hulu on Disney+. For bundle subscribers, terms apply.
At Hill's Pet Nutrition, we know that pet parent guilt is real. Leaving too long, playing too little. New homes, new babies, waking them up when they look so comfy. Running out of patience, running out of treats. Running the vacuum! You can only do so much. That's why there's Hills, science-led nutrition to help you give more love than humanly possible. Because you're only human, there's Hills. Find the right food at hillspet.com/science does more.
This is an iHeart podcast. Guaranteed human.